You're listening to a podcast called Gary, with me, Tom Mann.
And me, Adam Etheridge.
In this week's episode, we'll be looking back on the glory days of WWE, or what we used to call WWF. Adam and I reminisce about our favourite wrestlers, storylines, and shared experience of attending 1992's SummerSlam at Wembley Stadium.
So this is another week of the podcast called Gary. Welcome, guys. And this week, yes, we're talking about WWE. And this is Tom, and he's going to do some sort of special thing, not like a quiz or something. Of course not. Surely not, Tom.
Oh, yeah. You guessed it right. We're doing a quiz this week, Adam. I am going to test. It's like you knew. I am going to test your grey matter in the world of WWE, or F as we used to know it, back in the day when we used to be avid fans in the early 90s. That's when I think of as the heyday, but it was probably just that's when I enjoyed it the most as the target audience as a kid of that age. Yeah. And I think that really we should get going with this amazing quiz that I've devised by the name of...
Are you ready?
Quiz.
Quiz. That definitely looks like a snippet off a game. That image there definitely looks like a actual... You know, I just want to press like start and I'm going.
Yes,
with the
because it has that kind of Tron style floor, holodeck floor, doesn't it? With those grid lines and everything in a very futuristic way. So this is a computer game. It's really futuristic.
But look at like a couple of the characters. If you look at like the what's his name, Jake the Snake there, and where's that other guy there? Oh gosh, what was his name? Or the sort of the Elvis looking one, and Dusty Rhodes in the back there. They look like just drawings, whereas obviously the other ones are photographs. You can tell they're photographs, like Randy Savage and all that business. So
do you know what? You're absolutely right. Some of them look like photographs, and some of them look like drawings. It's a bit of a weird combo that
they didn't have the rights to actually put them in like that. I don't know, maybe they didn't have the ability to actually do it.
Yeah, and you know what, back in those days I don't know where Adobe Photoshop was in terms of the level of capability that it had, but yeah, that sure does look like a computer game. And I can name several of those wrestlers. I'm ashamed to say I can see Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Hulk Hogan, Bret the Hitman Hart, Jake the Snake, Randy Savage.
Just the bottom of $1 Million Man and what's his name? Rowdy Roddy Piper.
Rowdy Roddy Piper. And what is the Elvis guy looking like? What's he called? The Elvis guy? Can you remember him?
The Honky Tonk Man.
Honky Tonk Man. All right, baby, here we go then. So, question number 1. Who was the first wrestler to win the WWF Championship at WrestleMania?
Oh, gosh.
Was it Hulk Hogan, A, B, Andre the Giant, C, Macho Man Randy Savage, or D, the Iron Sheik?
So the first is this the first WrestleMania? So this will be the first of the whole.
Yes, 1985 WrestleMania 1.
Goodness,
it's now known. Of course, it was just WrestleMania then.
Yeah. Now I'm kind of torn. I bet this is like a bit of a trick question. I'm leaning towards Hulk Hogan, but I kind of feel like it would be like Andre the Giant with something weird like that. I'm going to go Hulk Hogan just for the fact that it feels like the right thing to say.
Are you absolutely sure about that?
I'm not. I'm torn between him and the Giant, to be fair. But I'm still gonna go Hogan. Sodiq.
All right, we're gonna stick with Hogan. Well, let's find out.
Right, you're right.
Yeah.
Yes, boom, you were. And actually, it was a little bit of a tricky question. I thought you might go Andre because he, of course, was also the big deal at the time. Hulk Hogan did win it, but he actually won it with Mr. T. Mr. T was wrestling that day. And it was basically Hulk Hogan accompanied by Mr. T and Jimmy Snooker, against Rowdy Roddy Piper, Mr. Wonderful, accompanied by Cowboy Bob Orton. So, yeah, there we go. Good work. Next question. Hulk Hogan's real name. What is Hulk Hogan's real name? Is it A, Wayne Hogan, B, James Bryan Helwig, C, Terry Jean Bollea, or D, Richard Vigneault?
I believe it's C, Terry, because I think he's known as Terry Hogan, but I'm gonna go with Terry because that's the only Terry in there. That could be one of those where you've slung that in just to catch me out. But I'm gonna say Terry Jean Bollea.
You're right. You're right.
Well done. That's right. Wayne Hogan was just a little bit of a red herring from me. That's not real at all. Completely made up. B, James Bryan Helwig is actually the real name of the Ultimate Warrior. And Richard Vigneault is the model Rick Martel. That's his real name.
My God.
So, yes, you're quite right. Terry Jean Bollea is Hulk Hogan's real name. So, third question.
I like these guys.
Oh, yeah. I think you used to have a poster of these guys, which is the Legion of Doom, of course.
Legion of Doom.
And what was the name of the Legion of Doom's iconic finishing move? Can you do 3 for 3? So A, the Legion Lockdown, B, the Powerbomb Express, C, the Doomsday Device, or D, the Demolition Decapitator.
No. So it wasn't Demolition because that was, I think, the Demolition. So I'm going to say the Doomsday Device.
You're going for C, the Doomsday Device. Can you make it 3 out of 3?
You're right. You're right.
Boom! You are doing very well. You are clearly a big fan of WWF. Well done, mate. Well done. I cannot seem to get you to do a wrong answer right now. Okay, so question 4.
Ooh.
What was the name of the controversial WWF faction that included Shawn Michaels and Triple H? Was it A, the Hart Foundation, B, the NWO, C, D Generation X, or D, the Four Horsemen?
So yeah, NWO, I believe, was something that came after. I think that's what Hogan and I think what was his name, Diesel and things like that were part of. And it was it was the letter C as the option, but D Generation X was the group.
Well, let's see if you're right or not.
You're right. You're right.
Yes, and I believe that there were a couple of different incarnations of D Generation X, but the original founders were Shawn Michaels and Triple H. And this was at the very start or just before the Attitude Era began in the Federation.
God, she was a machine, wasn't she?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Okay, well, this is so far you've got 4 questions correct.
House.
Okay, can you get the full house? This is the 5th and final question coming up right now. In SummerSlam 1992, which British sporting celebrity accompanied Davey Boy Smith, aka British Bulldog, to the ring? No multiple choice. You're just going to have to guess now. Which British sporting celebrity accompanied the British Bulldog to the ring? Do you have any idea? Are you thinking, is it on the tip of your tongue?
No,
or is it just a wild guess?
It would have to be a bit of a think. I could probably work it out, but no. It's just for the case of dead air. Let's just put me out of my misery. What was it?
Okay, let me give you a clue. Okay, so it's obviously a fairly pugilistic sport, wrestling. Well, the celebrity who accompanied David Boy Smith, aka British Bulldog, was in a different pugilistic sport, i.e., one that involved punching or boxing. So it was a boxer.
So I'm going to say Lennox Lewis.
Let's see now.
You're right. You're right.
Oh, man. I wanted you to be wrong, if only so I could play this.
Isn't your lucky day?
Did you clock where that was from?
Isn't your lucky day?
Isn't your lucky day? No, I can't put my finger on it. What was that from?
Couple of wavy lines.
Oh God, yeah, Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters, Venkman. Yeah, and what about You're Right, You're Right?
That's a Carrey. Is that Jim Carrey thing?
Let's try it again.
You're right. You're right.
Oh, it's from Back to the Future. It's the dad, isn't it? It's the
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's you got my car towed all the way. You know, all they got for me is a light beer. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
What are you looking at, butthead?
I do love that film. Yes, so let's go straight into that's a great quiz. Thank you very much for that, Tom. As I say, that brings back a lot of memories. And I think the thing is, this is part of why we're doing this. I think maybe some people might be thinking, oh, why are we talking about WWE? Because as we are talking about, it is a part of a part of our kind of adopted culture. And I say we as Brits were very much, the giant haystacks and the big daddies and the very basic kind of, TV. If it was, I think it used to be on a Sunday. I think infamously, my great grandmother used to enjoy watching it live in Weston-super-Mare. She used to watch like wrestling and things like that. And she used to scream like hell at them when they used to do things. And she apparently tried to like swipe one of them with a handbag or something. When there's all this kind of stuff, whether it was true or not. But
your great grandma actually went to the event itself, the old British wrestling, really.
I think they used to have wrestling on somewhere in Weston-super-Mare. I believe that she used to enjoy watching things like that. And again, that could be completely fabricated, but I'm fairly certain that's true. So yeah, she used to apparently like shout and scream at the sort of the actual the event itself, is in sort of being like, get off him, you bastard. So obviously probably didn't swear, but so yeah, so she it's even for generations of that to go to somewhere back in the day where it was just really badly kind of choreographed and things like that. I mean, it's just a completely different universe.
Well, he had a hell of a real name, didn't he? The old British wrestler, Giant Haystacks. Yeah, that's right. Giant Haystacks was Shirley, wasn't he? That was his first name. And I think, having looked into a few of the wrestlers in WWF, actually, some of them did come from a background where they had problems growing up, maybe they're a little bit different, and they got bullied. I think the British Bulldog had something when he was young that kind of made him stand out in a bad way, and I think that he used the wrestling and bulked up to basically shut his bullies up, sort of thing. So it's probably the similar thing with Shirley, aka Giant Haystacks, as well.
Well, I think that.
Oh yeah, sorry, you've just broken up a little bit for me there.
Yeah, me too. But yeah, but going back to what you were saying about the British Bulldog, I think if you watch some of the early WWF, as we like to call it back then, he had a brother, or he has, him and his brother used to tag team, and they were both very muscular, but they weren't like the brick shithouse that he was towards the end. The kind of the bodybuilder sort of size. I think that's the thing, is that I think the going towards again this darker element that we now discover, or sort of have been discovering over the last sort of maybe 10 years, and how the sort of the way things are manipulated more in a very sinister way at times and things like that. So again, we were talking off camera about the McMahon documentary, which I haven't seen much of, but I've seen lots of different videos and interviews with the different wrestlers, from things like the Stone Cold Steve Austin interviews, and again, it's quite sort of eye opening in terms of sort of having these guys being out of character and talking about the sort of the things they had to sort of accept or had to kind of step up and do, and in the face of kind of all these things for our entertainment. And I think there's documentary evidence about how a lot of them had to put a lot of lives on the line in different physical ways and medical ways, and pushing their bodies to either be as tuned as they could, or be kind of hard and resilient as they could to be able to withstand some of the things that they were doing. So I think it's not a surprise that there's a number of guys who died well before their time. But it does kind of highlight, like you was just saying at the beginning of that, where they probably, a lot of them are quite plagued with other demons, and these things they do in a way are kind of trying to sort of chase them away in a way.
Well, on the Vince McMahon documentary, Mr. McMahon, that you're just referring to, I've watched, I think, the first 3 or 4 episodes. And one of the interesting things is that nowadays the wrestlers have a contract, such as when they're not wrestling, they still get paid. So it's set up in, a bit more of a way that gives them benefits and things like that. Whereas in the 80s and 90s, if they didn't wrestle, they didn't get paid, and therefore they used to wrestle hurt. They used to wrestle through injuries and then get even more injured. And so that was something that they had to battle with. It was probably less regulated than it was. Again, off camera, when we've been communicating about this podcast, you mentioned Jesse Ventura. And that was interesting to see that he had a little bit of a ruckus with Vince McMahon, because, of course, it's his brainchild, isn't it? McMahon, essentially, he inherited the kingdom from his father, but he built it up as what we understand today. And at one point, Jesse Ventura was trying to create a union of wrestlers, and he was basically tapping them all up, trying to get them to have a bit more power to the elbow and be able to join forces and get a better deal. And McMahon, actually, it was Hulk Hogan that ratted him out to McMahon, and McMahon basically took them one by one and said, "You will not have a union. You will." So he basically completely undermined Jesse Ventura, and that was the end of that. So, but they were wrestling, they say in this documentary, nearly 365 days a year, because of course a lot of it was televised, some of it wasn't televised, and they'd still have to go round and do these big shows because it was big money they were making, just stadium tours. And I mean, when we saw them at Wembley Stadium, I remember it being absolutely packed. It was probably about 85,000 attendees or something like that.
Yeah, because also they could have most of the pitch as well, because that's the other thing.
Yes, it was probably more than that. It's probably more like 100,000 actually.
Yeah, so it's like a boxing match where they could have it all the way almost right to the ring, and it was amazing spectacle to watch and to be part of. The energy was amazing. And at the time of life that we went, it was just kind of that point where we were I suppose it was just dipping off the kind of the time where we were kind of, I suppose, not long after that, we probably would find or be thinking that this is maybe something that this is not something we'd probably continue to watch. But then I think that was the sort of, I think, the problem with WWE and WWF in a way, because I think in terms of the UK audience, it was very much aimed at the children, like by the merchandise and all that stuff. So it was getting the kids to kind of get the parents to buy the merch, and all that sort of stuff. I think that was where they're making most of their money, off screen and off actual these, going to these things. So we didn't get a chance to go to them. Very rarely they came across the UK, and that's changed since, because they know they can do that. But again, as you say, it's yet another concert slash events, that they have to find the wrestlers to put on the bill, and people want to see the big stars, and if they're not the big stars there every time, then it becomes more and more kind of like, oh well, I didn't get to see that, so in a way it was at first difficult because they maybe only had like a small bunch of heroes, and then all these villains to try and for them to beat. So there was this kind of disparity around who was a hero and who was a villain in kind of the narrative. But then sort of people sort of flip flopping, because there used to be that whole kind of thing where you'd sort of say, oh, he's going to turn bad now, and there'd be that kind of sort of a moment where it would say like there'd be an outrage where someone had lost a belt or lost a match to some sort of thing, and then that would be them. They'd be like coming back, and I'm not, I'm no longer so and so. I'm doing this, that, and the other. So it would, because it'd all be around the merch. So if they were finding that like their merch wasn't selling, they used to stick him as a villain for a while, and then they used to tee them up to come back. And then, of course, everyone, again, would be like, whoa, like Hogan's back, or Ultimate Warrior's good again, or something like that. And their products just skyrocketed through the roof. And, I remember getting my parents to order things from America for me and stuff like that. And, days before all this stuff was, easy to get hold of, these Amazons and all these other things, making it very easy to get hold of stuff. It wasn't at all, and you had to wait a long time to get things. So it wasn't really kind of something that you just could do. So there was sort of a possible sort of counterfeity kind of things. I remember sort of people trying to sell sort of dumb, shitty versions of these sort of things, because the market was there to still sell stuff that was, you couldn't get it from America very easily. So there was a market for some people to give you something a bit shunky, but people wanted to have a pretend looking belt or something, just be one of those sort of things. So I think that in itself is the trap of the time it was. And then they went through a period where there was just very, very limited kind of UK kind of participants. I think it was one of those where it dipped off again from the telly, but then they brought in your lots and lots of these kind of anti-heroes. So guys that were a bit of an arse, but actually, they were still quite entertaining to watch. And it's like you kind of loved them or hate them, but at the same time, you kind of loved to hate them. And you see like your Rocks and your Stone Cold Steve Austins, and they were never really a villain or a good guy. They were just kind of, the narrative for them would be that, I don't know, it could be that they're less of a twat than the other guy,
Apparently, The Rock, because he comes from a heritage of wrestlers, and his dad was a wrestler, and there's a lot of history with his family. So when they first introduced his character, they made a big deal of that, and they taught that up and said, oh, this great tradition of The Rock, he's got all this family heritage and all this. And apparently people were just sick of hearing about it. It just, nobody liked him because they were just like, oh, he was sort of too, like a goody two shoes or something. Yeah. And so eventually they just kind of ditched that idea. And then he just came in with a lot more attitude, and it was a bit more kind of aggressive, and then it just kind of just all turned for him, and that's when people started to like him, when they tried to stop making people try to like him, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Was, as you say, because McMahon used the term, you're either a baby face, you're either a hero, or you're the heel, you're the bad guy, and they kind of stopped. Once he became a bit more of a heel, then it was... his popularity soared. But as you say, I think that was during the era when it was ambivalent. They were neither good nor bad. They were just interesting. Was that the Attitude Era? I'm pretty sure that he was during that time.
I think that's it. So I think that was kind of sort of the point where, as I say, I kind of stopped watching by that point when, say, like Hogan, I think Hogan left, I believe, and went back to WCW, and took a lot of the, took a lot. I think they used to do that, didn't they? They used to kind of, again, go and have a bit of a time on the old circuit in a way, and sort of seem to kind of, that's how I perceive it. It was like WCW to me was like their kind of sort of the B version of their kind of it was still massive, but I mean it just wasn't as massive as WWE. And I think it used to kind of go back there to sort of, again, if you weren't so popular in WWE, you go back there, make a bit of a comeback there. And so it was kind of, it just sort of like you'd go in cycles where you'd either kind of you'd leave and go to WCW, and it was always this kind of like, oh, controversy is going to go to so and so, and that's again, it's all about the narrative. It's all about sort of creating the story and the, this sort of trying to make it believable. I mean, against some of the things the corners they must have written themselves into to try and, to actually kind of bend the sort of reality about, what was going on, how could they bring someone in, or how could this person be involved, and how can they now have this sort of opinion, and and as I say, there must be a huge amount of kind of just blind sort of trust in terms of like people just going, oh well, who cares, Hogan's back, or who cares, it's so and so, and just kind of conveniently forget and forgive.
Well, I always thought, like you, that WCW was the poor relation, and that was the B movie of the wrestling world, if you like. But apparently, there was a period of time when a guy called Ted Turner, and you might know Turner Classic Movies, for example. The other thing Ted Turner's famous for is launching CNN. But he's basically a media mogul, incredibly wealthy, and he had really deep pockets. And he could see how well WWF was doing. And so he poured a load of money into WCW. And for a while, they had the edge, and they actually bought people, like, as you say, like Hulk Hogan. They were just offering the wrestlers huge amounts of money. And so so for a while, WWF started to lose all their stars, and it was actually a time when they were looking, and they were huge, they were being really dominated as well by WCW for a bit, to the point where WWF was in the margins, and that was the kind of the B option. And then they basically said, we've got to do something about this. And what they realized was that WCW were kind of going for a different angle, and they were appealing to older people. So whereas WWF was very focused on exactly our age, and we saw that in 92 to 12, 13-year-olds, WCW with this new brand was going for more like sort of 18 to 25-year-olds. Yeah. And it was a bit more raw, a bit more kind of edgy. And that's when WWF went, okay, we need to kind of do the same thing but outdo them. And so they brought in this Attitude Era, and that's, as to say, that they kind of credit Shawn Michaels, and that was it, D-Generation X, that you got the answer earlier. That was what kick-started it off. And at first, apparently Shawn Michaels kind of walked out and started doing this raunchy dance. And Vince McMahon was like, what the fuck did you do that for? That was awful.
Yeah.
And then he kind of twigged and went, yes. Then that kind of kick-started it. And then he was like, oh, hang on. Actually, that might not be such a bad idea. And then he changed his mind, and then that launched this new kind of approach. And sure enough, they did win back the audience. That was quite interesting.
Because they also they added an element of female roles into it as well, to kind of, again, there was they brought in this kind of, I don't want to say it was like it's sort of titillation, but it was in a way. So like you say, and that was where I was going with before, is that they went from being, it's all about the merch for kids, And it was like all this sort of thing, like, take your vitamins, guys, and all that business, trying to make people kind of like these, model citizens or whatever, to rebranding to the ones who used to watch it, who are now really like thinking, oh, this is not really aimed at us anymore, to be re-aimed at thinking, all right, okay, there's a bit more kind of like, it's a bit more sort of adult now, and there's a bit of swearing maybe, or there's a bit of like mild nudity or something like that from some like again co-star or something to the sort of the whole thing. And then I think then they had the whole sort of became the next thing, which was like you're this sort of what's the guy called when he used to do all the kind of jumping off the cages, and he was jumping onto barbed wire and stuff. Some of that element where they brought in those sort of the real kind of hardcore kind of wrestling, and I should answer my brain. So again, it wasn't something that I was hugely attracted to, but at the same time, I get it. It's like exactly as you said, they just rebranded the brand and people had enough nostalgia to kind of go, oh yeah, actually, it's like it's pretty much for me like it's like American football style kind of promotion for wrestling, and that's how they've kind of done it. They've gone, let's basically take the level of kind of investment that they do into American football and the spectacle of that, and put it into two or more guys fighting in a very small space. I mean, again, some of these venues they go to, you would never have been able to see anything without blooming screens and things anyway. So then, but they probably didn't have screens as well. That's the other thing, is that it probably didn't have massive screens everywhere, like that we kind of benefited from later on. So when they were in that position where they could have, like, just you'd be able to sort of be there but still see what's going on properly, it was even better. So I don't know, I think some of these guys have spent a lot of money going to see something just because it was a spectacle, they probably just for the fact that they've been to, like we did, just been to a wrestling thing, and we happened to be to one of the big ones, and that was it. So I think, as they say, once they started doing that and sort of made it more adult, I think it just seemed to kind of, it just hit a level of people. It's a bit like they do in Marvel, isn't it? It's that kind of like, oh, these are kids that used to watch watch cartoons, and now we're just bringing them to life. And I think it's that kind of just tapping into that source where they were, that nugget that was kind of just drifting away, and they just managed to just to kind of just get back in touch with it.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that they were good at adapting like that, and they knew what they had, and they could really tap into the zeitgeist. And I think something else that they tended to do quite well was to look at what was happening out there in the world and at popular culture and weave that into their storyline. So, for example, one of the things they did was, I think it was the Iron Sheik, perhaps. They did this storyline where they sort of tapped into the Gulf War element of it. And that got very controversial, and I think they pitched him against Hulk Hogan or something, and
Sergeant Slaughter, because he went
Sergeant Slaughter. That's it. And he kind of defected,
didn't he? Yeah.
Yes, he defected, and then that became extremely controversial, and they had to kind of just dial that back a little bit because they realised they'd probably gone a step too far, but they were always very sensitive to what was going on and weaving that in. And you've got to give Vince McMahon credit for the storylines that he came up with, and he could sense what an audience would like, and that's quite a talent, I think, to always know what would keep people interested and just the right point at which to switch them from a good guy to a bad guy and vice versa. I think that was quite clever.
I think that was the good thing about their their style anyway is to try and when they got to a point where they're like, this guy is just so hated, what can we do to make people love him? And I think that's the challenge, is that they just kind of thought, well, do you know what? If we can succeed, because it's like I say, it's not like, I mean, I bet there's so many wrestlers and characters, because I mean, some of them have come back as different things, like Goldust. He was like Justin Rhodes, he was like Dusty Rhodes' son. And he came in as Dustin Rhodes, and it was just like so vanilla. People were just like, well, we don't really care. And then when he came as Goldust, it was just like this sort of transvestite kind of wrestling weirdy kind of thing. I mean, people were just a bit like, this is sort of interesting. And then his character was just well developed. And I think that's the other thing, is that you can't have an Undertaker every time, but at the same time, where they did him and his brother, and the whole mystery around sort of that went on for years. I mean, you just was it the Undertaker? Was it his brother? And that was the thing, because
the Undertaker was probably the best one for me. That was the one that always sticks in my head. And the Paul Bearer, he was a funny character as well, wasn't he? Or Paul Bearer, or whatever he's called.
Paul Bearer, yeah. But see, that's it, because he was I can't think who he was with. There was another wrestler he was with originally. But again, it was all this kind of like, it just hit the wrong mark with people. And I think he was trying, it was a bit more like Jimmy, what was the guy with the microphone and the sort of like the big mullet? It was like Jimmy something. He was like a manager. And he's like manage the what's his name? The $1 Million Man and people like that. And people already had like a sort of a sniveling kind of, creepy kind of guy already. Whereas this Paul Bearer guy was just kind of like, right, well, we've got something to work with. And it was just very well put through. And I think, as I say, it just became that sort of story that they just paid out so many times. Just like one of the things they just created that just kept going and going, and they just didn't really have to do much more than just tweak things every so often. And just to say, it just kept the audience baying for more. And I think you're right in terms of the sort of there was the guy called Papa Shango. Yeah, Papa Shango. There was that kind of thing where it was all about voodoo, and it started getting a bit too dark. And then I think it was one of those where I can't remember exactly how, but it was I think it was Hogan and the Undertaker, and do you know what I mean? So it became like you had these sort of key guys who were kind of seen as like the light and the dark, and then they say that blurred line in between, where you get sort of villains who are less villainous than the other, and you get someone who was a bastard, but then you'd have someone like the Undertaker who was classically seen as a villain, would sort of pick on them because he would see them as being morally not. Do you know what I mean? It was this kind of moments where he was kind of brought in because it was like even the bad guys get fucked up by the Undertaker, and it's like
he was like an anti-hero type figure. The Undertaker
was an anti-hero,
yeah. I really liked him. I think probably he was my favourite of all time when I think of all the characters. He was just a great character, and the guy that played him, I forget the guy's real name, but did such a great job with that. And then the other thing that I was just wanting to mention earlier, you mentioned the real life jeopardy, and the two things that make me think of the jeopardy around wrestling is the first is things like Owen Hart's death, which is a little bit in folklore, isn't it? I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. And then the other one is, did you ever see that Louis Theroux, where Louis Theroux went and he did this undercover job, and he trained with the wrestlers? Well, he didn't really train, but he went to their training camp and he interviewed them, and then they basically turned the tables on him, and they really effed him over, and because they were not happy with what he was basically saying, yeah, but it's all fake, isn't it? And blah, 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 which of course it is. The storylines are fake. But whether it was that they were protecting the brand and fiercely saying, no, it's not fake in order to, keep the audience thinking that there was an element of truth to it, or whether it was that it was more about, yes, the storylines might be fake, but we are professional athletes. We train extremely hard.
Yeah.
I think it's possibly the latter. And they then did put him through his paces and this grueling, horrible workout to the point where he was sick. And it was one of those moments where I kind of felt there was genuine fear from Louis Theroux and the production crew, because they were just completely out of control. And it was like, nope, these wrestlers are playing their own game now, and you've got to play along with it. Those are the two things that made me think of the real life Jeopardy.
Yeah, I mean, the Owen Hart thing, and there we go. That's like when the circus has an accident and a trapeze artist doesn't, something fails. And I mean, and then this is the thing, is that these guys are a blend of all these sort of things, and they're expected to do, they probably don't anyway, since then, probably do stuff like that. Just because I think that's like you were saying before, is about the getting paid thing and doing stuff that, probably just amount of things they get asked to do. And they were like, really? And, and they just if you don't do it, we'll get someone else to do it, sort of thing. And so then there's sort of the need to kind of do things that probably were not as safely thought out of, but likewise, because I suppose they, in a way, they're like stuntmen, aren't they? And that kind of they learn techniques above their wrestling kind of abilities, which probably come from that sort of background, but then they need to learn how to fall, how to do all the things that sort of and how to pull a punch and how to kind of do things that make it look real and sound real. Because I mean, that slaps, and like they say, if they hit each other, it might not be like a punch, but because they do have to hit each other, and they do have to kind of live with the fact that if you hit someone, it's going to hurt yourself, and if you get hit, it's going to hurt. It's just, and if you're jumping off.
Well, you're probably going to get to it, but for anybody that doesn't know how Owen Hart died, he fell 80 foot and severed his aorta. So that was an incredibly dangerous stunt. And I think you were right to say trapeze artists, it's very similar to that, isn't it? It's a similar kind of height that they're working with. And I guess these accidents do happen.
And I think that's the thing, because they do these things where they're jumping off cages, or they're doing stuff where they're not just jumping off something that's, 6 foot high, and they're stood effectively 15 foot high, maybe, that sort of thing. Or maybe they when you accumulate the sort of height they're coming from, there's some times where they're stood on and working on apparatus that is probably over 30 foot high in the air. And regardless of the best intention to fall on these things, they're not falling on always soft things. The ring that they're landing on is effectively padded board. It's not like nice soft cushions. So yeah, I mean, it's surprising that not more people die, and maybe it's one of the kind of the hat off to the kind of the point what you were saying before, that they are professionals at doing, or they work to be as professional as they can to make things look and as more, it's not as real as we see it, but at the same time, that's the point, is that there's no going back from the fact that if they're jumping or landing and punching, and occasionally those things don't go to plan, and as we have seen, there are people who have bad injuries and fatalities.
The thing that interests me about that as well is that generally speaking, in fact, 95% of the time, they will know who is going to win and who's going to lose, as in the two wrestlers who they're having, or the tag teams will know. But to what extent they rehearse the moves in advance, and to what extent they're just sort of improvising as well, that interests me, because again, having watched the McMahon documentary, when they I think it was WrestleMania 3, to promote it, they brought Andre the Giant back, and because he'd retired because he had back issues, and they made him have a back operation and stuff, and they offered him a lot of money basically to do it. And but Hulk Hogan says he didn't know going into it whether he was going to win or lose, and he basically said to McMahon, "Tell me what's going to happen. What's going to happen?" And he's going, "I'll be fine." And then Andre the Giant saying, "Don't worry, I'll do the right thing." And he's like, "What does that mean?" So although he sort of knew he was meant to win, he didn't know completely that Andre the Giant was going to play along with it. So he actually went into WrestleMania and that fight not really knowing what was going to happen, he said. And basically it was only when he didn't, what's the word where they kind of kick out, when he didn't kick out, that he was like, okay, I've won this now. But so I think probably more so longer ago it was like that. Now I imagine it's very, very controlled and rehearsed,
Well, talking about Andre the Giant, apparently he was infamous for not pulling his punches. Apparently he did used to punch the shit out of people, and he used to be one of those where they used to complain like mad because, again, he used to come into the locker room and be like, "Oh, you can't take it," sort of thing, and they used to complain like mad about it, because he used to be like, yeah, I'll be fine, and then he used to clobber them, and and I think there's an element of that he was kind of, again, just brought in because he was a brute. Really, wasn't, that was all it was. He was just a freak, wasn't it? So they just thought, well, and I think, to be honest, he probably just thought, well, these little guys, I'll just I'll have a bit of fun with them, and I suppose realistically, technically, a lot of them could have probably done a lot to him to kind of to actually just to deal with him, because he probably wasn't particularly technical. So I think there's an element to that, but I mean, I was going from that in terms of who's going to win the fight, because I think the other thing is, as well, is when you got like effectively two goodies, like two heroes having to fight. Like I remember being able to stay up. My grandfather had Sky at that point, and I was allowed to watch the Ultimate Warrior versus Hogan fight. And it was one of those where it was just like, it was so exhilarating, because the whole point of it was back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And even to the point where I bought that video, and I had the magazines and all sorts of things, because it was a huge thing where, who was going to win, because it's like, they're both hugely popular. And, you've got Hogan, which was sort of the cornerstone hero, and then Ultimate Warrior, who was this kind of strange, but the energy the guy used to bring into the whole sort of thing. I mean, he was kind of probably like one of the first anti-heroes in the whole sort of scheme of things. And again, if you watch some of the TikTok videos where he upset a child or something like that, he was off, he wasn't working, and it was someone wanted his autograph, and he was just like, no, go away, sort of thing. And he got back to McMahon, and McMahon made him record a video to send to this kid. And he's like, there's like, you can see him, he's trying to do this whole like Ultimate Warrior kind of like, when a warrior, that sort of, the whole kind of the thing he used to do. And he's, and part of their job was to try to think of those sound bites just off the bat, just trying to work it out, and just if you think, and we think I talk nonsense, but that was what they were doing. The things he used to say, they were taught to just keep talking and finding words to keep, draw it out, and I'm look up to look to the sky, and it's such good insight, because you watch that and you see him going like, go from being the warrior character to kind of his normal self, going, man, I didn't even do anything wrong. It's like, what the hell am I doing recording this video for this guy, this kid? I mean, and it's like,
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And and this is the thing, because the Gillen goes back to being these guys who we used their essence and for entertainment. And we didn't really see them as real human beings. And in where these people are, and it happens to a lot of sportsmen and a lot of famous people, I again give it to that, the fact that they're not allowed to have an off day, especially with someone like Vince McMahon kind of like dominating how the narrative, again, even when they're not even working, goes to show you kind of like the power of just the perception that because if he was if it was in the paper that the Ultimate Warrior did this or something like that, and it would affect the way their stories work, and the stories they probably planned for however many seasons or whatever it is they call it, years maybe. And there has been occasions like that where someone's, I don't know, got on a drug charge or something like that, so they had to then villainize them. And then so there's it, and they have to shoehorn something in and just blah blah blah. So I think that it's a very tough thing for these guys, as well as being physically able and doing all these things, to suck up the kind of the being told one way or another they've got to go down a particular way. And and I say it might look so alien to people, because that's the thing, because it's like you think people have a picture of something in their head, and then that person turns, and then it's like, well, of course, you get people who have problems, but it's in that magnified way when you're watching a character change. And then you like all this NWA stuff. So you got all the Hogan, Hollywood Hogan, and all this sort of thing where they're villains again, and it's all that kind of coming in, and it's all, as you said, the attitude thing. It's all, it becomes more blurred about like, well, actually, I like someone with a bit more of a twatty attitude or something like that. It wasn't as much as this kind of like, I'm going for the good guy. It was very rare. You'd be like, I'm sticking up for Earthquake, or do you know what I mean, or Yokozuna. I mean, it'd be very rare that you'd be rooting for a villain. But I think this is nowadays, and much more like, say, from the Attitude Era, they capitalized on the fact that they could just have characters dipping in and out of being a twat or or less of a twat. And it just being able to solve a lot of their story problems from week to week, so, say that again, probably just became whoever came up with that. If it was Shawn Michaels, then, he deserves a lot more credit than he actually seems to have. But, it's as I don't watch it enough now to even see where it's at now, because that's the thing, because it's like it could be just just so random that they've got so many different things now as well, haven't they? Got so many different like pockets of things now. It's not even just events. It's like different week things, so that it's all like hardcore or so and so, whatever it is. It's all sort of different, goes into different veins of storyline. It's so clever. So
it's like anything when it's develops over time, it just gets more and more nuanced and complex, and you'll have fans that are just so knowledgeable about these different strands of the wrestling world, and like you say, I think you get to our age now, and it's a bit impenetrable to kind of get your head round, really. Just to, back in our day, it was just a bit more, in a funny way, just innocent and a bit more, basic. Those are the days that I remember, and it was it just seemed so incredibly exciting. And I think you mentioned something earlier, which is true, in that now we can just watch it whatever we want at any point, and we can get hold of something the next day from Amazon. Even stuff from China could take 2 to 3 days sometimes. It's quite remarkable. And I think when it was the early 90s, as a British kid watching wrestling, it just seemed so much more otherworldly and glamorous. And I think there's an element of that now which we're never going to recapture, because the world has shrunk, and we are much more aware of how things work nowadays. It's just, you're never going to get that era back, in a way,
But just talking about that era in a different vein as well, because there was, of course, something that we like talking about a lot is the movie element to it, and of course you got people that have benefited massively, like The Rock, but like back then it was like Hogan, and it was like when he went into films, it was like obviously Rocky 3, sorry.
That's something I wanted to mention as well about Rocky 3, because when you look at him next to Sylvester Stallone in Rocky 3, he looks absolutely gigantic. But then when you see a picture of Hulk Hogan next to Andre the Giant, he looks like a dwarf. And it just makes you realise how bloody big Andre the Giant was. Sorry, but that's a bit of an aside. But yeah, Rocky 3, he's great in that, isn't it?
And that's the thing. It's like, it's strange for me because I hadn't seen Rocky 3 till later on in life, but I'd seen Hogan. So it was kind of looking back and thinking, oh, it's just so weird how he's kind of the Thunder Lips is here, baby. And it was all that kind of, again, the villainous kind of elements where, possibly he would have played, as maybe a character in one of the other WCWs as a younger man. He might have been like that, and it might have been quite normal to people seeing him like that. But then you've got the elements of, say, like Andre the Giants and things like Princess Bride and stuff like that, because of his stature and things like that. But Hogan sort of started that whole kind of movement of big scary guy as a softie in the films type thing. He was in Mr. Nanny as well. I mean, that was the other thing. There was another film that came out that, again, it was of its time. And Suburban Commando, I remember Suburban Commando being like very popular. And, but then that kind of opened the door for a lot of actors or wrestlers to become a little bit more Hollywoodized. And to be fair, most of them probably ended up as villains. We got Jesse the Body Ventura, of course, obviously for Predator and Total Recall, but another number of other films that he
Running Man.
Running Man. So it was Running Man I was thinking of, not Total Recall. Yeah, Running Man. But yeah,
and then of course you had The Rock later on, who has become just a huge movie star, probably the biggest movie star at the moment, really.
Yeah.
Moana 2, that's just coming out.
The guy who's in like what's it called, Guardians of the Galaxy. There's the guy who he's in lots of other sort of again, he's not necessarily B films, but he's like a sort of not so popular Rock. He seems to be like one of those where he's kind of popular because he's in things, but he's not necessarily in like massive films. Whereas again, like The Rock he's just done a very clever thing about just putting himself in places where he like you said, he probably he won't want to work at a certain point, so he might as well do all the things he wants to do now, and get and do all the work and all the in parts of the work he wants to do, so that it's done. He doesn't have any regrets, probably, other than not seeing his kids. But it's like the regime that he does is very much the same sort of thing an athlete do anyway to his working regime.
We've only got a few seconds left, but I want to part on this note in that they say that movie stars are a thing of the past, that we just don't have them anymore because of the nature of streaming and all that, and the films just aren't made in the same way. But I think there's an argument to say that The Rock is one of the last great movie stars, because I think he is. He sells a movie in the way that people in the past used to, and I want to take my hat off to him because I have a lot of respect for what he's achieved. I think he's worked incredibly hard, and as you say, he's made some really, really smart moves. But I've really enjoyed this trip down memory lane, mate. It's been really good, and I think we should do this sort of thing again. It's been fun, and until the next time,
take care.
I'll see you soon. Bye bye.
Bye. Well, mate.